Hello students, this is Miss Dalton and this video is over factoring trinomials. I'm going to show you two methods. They're really the same method, just one method has a little bit better organization to it. Okay, so take a second and write down these steps to factoring. This first method is what we call factoring by grouping. And we approached this a little bit in the last video, but now we're going to look at trinomials and how to get them set up to where we can group it like we did when there were four monomials. Okay, so the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to multiply a times c. And so look at where the a is. The a is the coefficient of x squared, and then c is your constant. So you're going to take those two values and multiply them. Then we're going to make a factor tree of this value. A lot of the times I will call that an AC chart or an AC table. And I'll demonstrate that when we look at an example. From this AC chart, you're going to choose factors that add or subtract to your B coefficient. So the B is the coefficient of x. Then you're going to rewrite the equation, splitting the B into these two factors that you just found. You're going to group the first two terms together and group the second two terms together. And then you're going to factor out the GCF of each group. And the first factor is what happens twice. And so when you get your parentheses, you want that to match up. So that is your first factor, and the second factor is what is on the outside of that group of parentheses. All right, so let's look at our first example. We're going to factor x squared plus 8x plus 15. So to start out with, I'm going to write down what my a, my b, and my c is. So in this particular example, your a is equal to 1. Remember, it's the number that's in front of your x squared term, and since there's nothing there, remember it's that invisible 1. And then our b is equal to 8, and our c is equal to 15. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to multiply your a times your c. So 1 times 15 is equal to 15, and so we're going to make that chart with 15. So we're going to make a little t-chart, and now you want to list all your factors of 15. So we have 1 and 15. 2 does not go into 15, so then I'll go to 3. 3 times 5 is 15, and then of course we have the negative values as well. So negative 1 times negative 15 gives us a positive 15, and negative 3 times negative 5. Okay, at this point you're going to choose the pair of factors that will add up to that B term. So we see that 3 and 5, when I add them together, they equal 8. And that's what I want. I want them to add up to my B term. So at this point, I will take that B term right here, and I'm going to rewrite it, bring down your x squared, and then that B, we're going to take these factors over here that added up to that B, and we're going to write them separate. So plus 3, and we're going to put the x with it, and then plus 5x. So what we have here is now we have the 3x and the 5x that add up to that 8x. So all we're doing is we're just splitting it back into the 4 terms so that we can go ahead and use grouping. And then we're going to bring down the plus 15. Now at this point, we group our first two together and we group our second two together. And we're going to look at the GCF for each group. So when we look at x squared and 3x, we can divide out an x. So we put that on the outside. And now let's go ahead and divide each of these by x. X squared divided by x is x. 3x divided by x is 3. Then we're going to look at 5x and 15. We can divide both of those by 5. So we're going to bring that 5 to the outside. Make sure you put a plus with it. And then when we divide each of those by 5, 5x divided by 5 is x, and 15 divided by 5 is 3. At this point, just like when we were factoring with 4 terms, your parentheses should match at this point, and when they do, that's going to become your first factor. And then your second factor comes from what's on the outside of those parentheses. So our second factor will be that x plus 5. And then of course you can always double check your answer by multiplying those back together to see if you get the original, which you should. Alright, so let's look at our next example. We have 2x squared minus 3x minus 14. So our a is 2, our b is negative 3, and our c is negative 14. So if we take our a times our c, let's go ahead and put that in parentheses, then we would have 2 times negative 14, and 2 times negative 14 is a negative 28. So now we're taking that negative 28 and we're going to list our factors. I always start and go in numerical order, so we're going to have negative 1 times a positive 28, and then the reverse of that, we would have positive 1 and negative 28. Then we'd have negative 2 times 14 and positive 2 times negative 14. 3 does not go into 28, but 4 does. So we'd have negative 4 and positive 7, or 4 and negative 7. And then we go to 5, 6, neither one of those works, and that brings us back to 7. And so we've already got the 7 times 4. So these are our factors. Look for the one that adds up to b, which is negative 3. So that would be 4 and negative 7. If I do 4 plus negative 7, that does in fact equal that negative 3. Which was our b. Okay. So let's rewrite our trinomial. We're going to bring down that first term, 2x squared. And then we split up the middle term into our factors that we just found right here. And you do want to put an x with it, so we have plus 4x and minus 7x. And then we bring down our minus 14. Okay, at this point we are going to group our first two terms together. Now you have to do something kind of special with this second group because we've got that negative 7x there. So we're going to put the negative 7 in the parentheses, and I want you to separate those parentheses with a plus sign. So when I divide out my GCF in my first parenthesis, I can divide both of those by a 2x. So I can divide 2x squared by 2x, and that would give me just x. The 2's would cancel. X squared divided by x is x. Then if I take 4x and divide it by 2x, That's going to give me a plus 2. Okay, now let's go to the second set of parentheses. In that second set of parentheses, when your leading term is a negative, you're going to divide out a negative. Okay, and then both of those terms can get divided by a negative 7. So when I divide out the negative 7, I will be left with x, and then negative 14 divided by negative 7 is a positive 2. Okay, this one always trips people up. You have to remember that if that third term right there is a negative, you have to pull it out. Now we notice that our parentheses match, and so we know that we're on the right track. That parenthesis that matches is going to be your first factor. And then the second factor comes from the outside pieces, here and here. And that will be your second parenthesis. And this should be your answer. Okay, looking back at those previous two examples, I should have pointed out that you should always look for a greatest common factor before you start. The previous two examples did not have a factor that I could divide out of all three terms. However, this one does. If you look at all three of these terms, you can see that all three of them are divisible by 2. So we need to pull out a 2 before we start to factor by grouping. So when I divide that first term by a 2, I'm going to have x squared left over. When I divide 22x by 2, I'll have plus 11x. And then when I divide 36 by 2, I'll be left with plus 18. Okay, now we use our A. Our A in this example is 1. Our B is 11. And our C is 18. So if we follow our same steps, A times C, A is 1, C is 18, so when I multiply those together, I get 18, and so I'm going to use that to make my t-chart. List your factors of 18, 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. 4 does not go into 18, neither does 5, and so that's it. Now we also have our negatives, so negative 1, negative 18, negative 2, negative 9, and negative 3 times negative 6. We're looking for the one that adds up to 11. So we want it to add up. B is our 11. And so if you look at this pair right here, 2 plus 9 does in fact equal 11. So that's what we're going to use. Now, when you start to factor that, you want to make sure that you keep that factor of 2 on the outside. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave my 2 on the outside and I'm going to put a bracket, because it gets a little crazy having a lot of parentheses. Now we're going to bring down that first term, the x squared, but then now we're going to split the middle term into our two factors that we found over here. So we're going to have a plus 2x, then we're going to have a plus 9x, and then we're going to bring down the plus 18. And I'm going to close my brackets. And here's why I used brackets, because now we're going to group our first two together and our last two together. So if I don't have those brackets there, it gets a little confusing. So we'll have 2 bracket. Now we're going to divide the first parenthesis by its GCF. Well, I can divide both of them by x. So bring your x outside And when you divide it by x, you're left with x and then plus 2. Okay? In your next set of parentheses, 9x and 18, you can divide both of those by 9. So your GCF is a 9, so put plus 9. Divide it, so you're left with x, and then 18 divided by 9 is plus 2. And close it off with that bracket. Okay, so here again, our parenthesis matches. So that's going to be our first factor. So I'm going to bring that 2 down. And then our first factor will be that x plus 2. Then the outside, x plus 9, represents that second factor that's in parentheses. And now, if I multiplied all of that back together, you would see that it does give you that original solution. Okay, example 4. I'm going to let you pause the video, try and work through this on your own. Remember to factor out a GCF before you start, and then when you're ready to check your answer, go ahead and press play. Okay, check your answers here to make sure that you have the right answer, and check your work, and let's move on. Okay, what I want to show you in these next 2 slides is how you can use that same method, which is factoring by grouping, in a method that we call the box method. And what this does is this hopefully this will give you a little bit of organization. Some people like this method better because they've got that box and it just makes more sense to them. It really is the same method. What you're going to do is you're going to place the a value in the top left box. And so we're going to put that a value right here. Okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the c value, which is your constant, and we're going to put that in the bottom right box. You're still going to multiply your a times your c together, and we're going to make that AC chart. Okay, so you're still going to do a times c, and then you're going to list your factors there. You're going to choose the factors that add up to that b term. So again, we're choosing the factors that add up to our b term, and here's where it becomes a little different. You're going to take those 2 values and you're going to put them in the box in the other 2 window panes. And it does not matter which one goes where. You just put one in one spot and put the other one in the other spot. And then instead of factoring out by looking at the GCF in parentheses, now we're going to factor out the GCF of each column and each row. And so I'll show you what that looks like in an example. And then your factors are going to be what's on the outside of the box. Again, look at this next example. If this makes more sense to you, then you could use this method. If not, just keep doing the factor by grouping. Okay, so look at this first example, x squared minus 4x plus 12. If I follow the rules for the box method, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to make a window pane or a box. We're going to put our a term in the top left, so x squared. You're putting the whole term, so x squared. Then we're going to take our c term, which is plus 12, and we're going to put it in the bottom right box. We're still going to make our AC chart, so our A is that 1, and our C is 12. So 1 times 12 is 12. And we're looking for factors of 12 that add up to give us that -4. And actually I can see that this has a mistake. This is supposed to be a negative 12. So I'm going to erase this plus sign here. And let's fix that. And let's put a negative 12. You'll see why as we start to make this AC chart. So negative 12 factors to be negative 1 times 12. And then I'm just going to list factors with negatives on the left side. So negative 2 times 6 and negative 3 times 4. And so we can see that if I do negative 2 plus 6, I get a positive 4. Well, if I switch those signs and make this a positive 2 and a negative 6, 2 times negative 6 still gives us that negative 12. But now, when I do 2 plus a negative 6, that gives us the negative 4 that we need. Okay, so now the plus 2x, you're going to put in one of your remaining window panes. And the negative 6x is going to go in your other window pane. And so now what we're doing is we're looking at, we want to look at the GCF for this column, and that's going to go above it. So if we look at x squared minus 6x, we can divide both of those by an x. Then we're going to look at the second column, and what we can factor out of that column is a 2. And one thing that about the box method is whatever sign is right here, that's the sign that comes out. Then we're going to look at the top row now. So if I look at this top row, x squared plus 2x can factor out an x. And then if I look at the bottom row, negative 6x minus 12, we're going to bring out this negative here. It's going to come out here. And then 6x and 12, we can factor out a 6. So what ends up happening now is that we have this set of parentheses as our first factor, and our second set of parentheses here, that is our second factor. So you can see that it's the exact same method as grouping. It's just some people like the box to be able to organize their information. Okay, so you try that next one. Use the box method, and then when you're ready to check your work, just press play. Okay, go ahead and check your work. One thing I want to point out that people like about the box method is think about in biology when you learn the Punnett square. If you look at this outside, so here we have x, and then we have an x over here. When I do x times x, that should give you this term right here, x squared. Okay? Same thing's true here. 2 times x gives you that positive 2x. Then if we do x times negative 4, that gives you negative 4x, and 2 times negative 4 gives you that negative 8. So some people like this better. It helps them find what those GCFs are when they're struggling with it. So I know this video was a little bit longer than normal. Factoring is huge, and so that is something that you're really going to have to make sure that you master. Factoring is hard, and so it's going to take you some time, but come back to this video if you need it. Again, have your notes filled out. Have some questions that you have for me so that I can help you out.